Kate, I loved your showing the map of Australia and giving us a sense of that. When you were early on in being an artist, you shared with us that you were working in paint and being a printmaker and a photography as the medium became known to you. Can you share with us some of the artists that you were aware of and photographers? I mean, it's a long ways for us to imagine who was being published then or being exhibited that we might know of. Okay.
Yeah, I guess there was a lot of people in the Bay Area of San Francisco, Jack Wellpot, Judy Data, all that whole crowd who were doing sort of much more experimental photography. There was all those wonderful women doing weird and multimedia stuff like Betty Hahn, stitching into photographs, and again hand colouring, which is sort of what inspired me to start hand colouring.
That's great. And that made its way to Australia for you to see.
Yes.
Fantastic. Imagine that.
We've got telephones,
well,
you know.
Yeah. That's good. That's good.
No, well, actually, the thing was that we were getting magazines. We were getting magazines, photography magazines. I think this has just gone off again.
And people like Graham Howe were in both places, I think, back and forth quite a bit, in the Australian Centre for Photography.
So actually also all the landscape, the people who were doing Southwest landscape stuff.
It's great.
But we were seeing a lot of that as well. And as I said, we were getting books and magazines in the very few photography bookshops that were opening up in the cities. So we were dashing down and buying them up and then going out and like copying everyone like crazy. Eggleston and
and a great time of experimentation in our medium too, to drop right in. And Keith, I remember you sharing a story when you were a young person of taking a bus ride to New York City to see pictures. Can you tell us about that?
I said I was a serious student of photography. Could I come visit your collection? I was 22. And that's when people sent letters. And I got a letter back from the Museum of Modern Art. It said, yeah, you can come up. Who do you want to see? And the only two people I knew that I wanted to see, because I was learning from books, was Henri Cartier-Bresson and Paul Strand, and Wynn Bullock. So I wrote them back, and they said, come on up. In those days, it was less expensive, and I had no money, to take the Greyhound bus, which I did. And I got off the Greyhound bus at the station. I'd never been to New York. It was cold. It was February. And I walked by a guy with a restaurant chalkboard around his neck. And he had a big fat cat under his arm. And he had on his chalkboard poems, $1. My dollars were precious. I walked right by him. Then I went back because I thought, this is bad. You should buy a poem. And I bought the #1 poem on his list was Rock Your Ass Off, which was pre-rap. It consisted of him in various cadences of voice yelling out, rock your ass off about 25 times. And I still think it's a pretty good mantra.
That's great. And did you ever get to see the Cartier-Bresson and the Paul Strand and the Wynn Bullock?
When I got to see the real prints, and I could see where they actually spotted, and if you've done photography, you know about spotting, I was so relieved. It wasn't perfect. And I could have been holding my firstborn child and had the same feeling of holding some of those prints with those little sissy white gloves. But it was great.
And I think did you meet Mr. Schakowsky as well on that trip?
Not really, but I nodded to him. It was there. I was nobody, but I was so happy to be there.
I bet that was really inspiring. So you both talk a lot about books, and I know from both of your homes, we're all floor-to-ceiling books. And Keith, you have had the pleasure, and not a common circumstance, to really work with the same designer on almost all your books. And I loved hearing about your first book and DJ Stout's first book to design, that you kind of grew up together with photography. And I love thinking about how DJ learned more about photography from you from that process, and you certainly learned more about design. And how has that evolved over time? Can you tell us a little bit about about your working relationship with that longtime designer colleague?
It's been a wonderful relationship. This is an opinion, and people would justifiably disagree with this, but there are quite a few photographers who have a huge hand in designing their own books, and it shows, and not a good way. They're really good at photographs, and they know how it should be laid out in their heads, but they don't know what's the best cover and how the typography is going to look, and they don't see sometimes comparisons and so on and so forth. And my education was arguing with him all the time that this wasn't right, and his retort was arguing with me that it was, and over time I started to see exactly what he was doing, and it broadened my world. My point being, I think it's a great blessing to work with a good designer. I think it's a useful thing, and it's kind of like doing your own book. It's like having, you know, if you're a lawyer, you got a fool for a client. If you're your own lawyer, that kind of thing. That's been my experience.
And I think most artists we know that have books that have passion actually have a team of people with them.
Yeah.
And Kate, you've had the good fortune of working so closely with Bill Witless, who's published so many of your books through the Witless collection, three. And I, as a neighbor and a friend, when Bill's in town and working on a book with Kate, because they design their own damn books.
That's an exception to the rule.
Yeah, it is. But it is an amazing thing to go over to Kate's house when Bill's in residence and they're working on a book, and you can slip in for coffee, and then you got to get out of the way. And on Los Sombras, it was amazing to step in to that world and see all the different elements around the house, from the different color swatches and photographs, of course, everywhere. And you two have an amazing working relationship, and I wonder if you could share a little bit more about that collaboration.
As you know, well, you don't know, but Bill Witless, who's got this extraordinary collection in Texas, the Witless Collection of Southwest and Mexican photography, which is at the Texas State University down in San Marcos. There's a couple of people here to represent that collection in the audience. And he is an amazing man. He was a book publisher way back in his 20s, and he, back in the days of typesetting, and he, of course, sort of learnt design from through the years. And so he has extraordinary talent and taste. Luckily, we're totally on the same page when it comes to what we like, which is sort of elegant and not quite as loud as DJ Stout.
Yeah. Definitely a different design style.
Yes. Anyway, we have a great time because we basically mostly agree on what we want the book to look like. And of course, it's again a great privilege for anyone to let me say what I want, but I do, and I usually, it usually works out pretty well. So I've been lucky. But as I just said to Keith, and you didn't hear because I didn't have the microphone, I actually have a degree in graphic design, so I love designing books, all sorts of things, and I do it. I do a little bit of design here and there just because I enjoy it. It's like making art, only it's useful.
Both make such beautiful books, and I'm interested in the process of how the images come together for both of you. Keith, in 2010, I moderated a panel that in Austin, Texas, for the Gernsheim Symposium, and actually Jace Graff, who's here today, Master Bookbinder, was on the panel as well, and Greg Albers, who has a presence here in Tucson. The three of you were my panel, and I asked Keith to be on the panel because I really wanted an artist for whom the bookmaking practice was a really important part of his artistic statement. And you shared some things with us. I actually listened to the tape of it today on the plane before it almost crashed, and I'm so happy to be here. And you specifically talked about starting with a title And you said that for you it was a practical thing. You said, I love words. It helps me to start with a title. I think of things that I'd like to do if I'm going to spend a couple of years doing it. And if I start with a title, it gives me a certain parameter in my mind. I start with an open-ended, more or less relatively lyrical title, such as Mojo, Uncertain to Blue, A Certain Alchemy. And I do that by design because it is a wider, more open venue to construct a body of work. And then, as you said earlier, you give yourself 2 or 3 years then to make that work. I often think of that as kind of putting a roof over your head in a way, that you then sort of set out and construct, perhaps make new work, bring other work into it. Is that your practice today? Do you continue that?
Yes. What happens if you work on a long-term project is it starts one way, but it doesn't end the way you think it's going to end, you know, because 1 or 2 years later, the pictures have changed, your life has changed a little bit, and it takes, probably like writing a novel, it takes turns that you didn't quite expect, that kind of thing. So I found it invigorating. The irony is I have students today that from midterm on, that's 7 weeks. And their project is to make an 80-page book using blurb software, and those little peckerwoods do a great job in 7 weeks, you know, where it took me a couple years, but they do that kind of. Never mind. Anyway, you get yourself.
And Kate, what about you? Do you finish a body of work before you think about the book? Do you set out to make it? Do you bring a book to the page when you feel like something's completed? How does your process happen?
Well, I'm not as lucky or as famous as Keith Carter, so I don't just get to say, I'm going to do a book now. So I've been lucky enough that Bill Witless again has said, we're going to do a book of that body of work. You know, get it done and we'll do a book. So I say, yes, sir, wonderful. And we do. But, you know, I can't guarantee that I'll have any more books in my career. I mean, I hope so, but it's not something I just get to do because I want to. It's a very expensive process. And, you know, University of Texas Press has to agree to spend a fortune and make a huge loss. And Bill convinces them to do that. But, yeah, so.
So for both of you, when you have the book, when you have the exhibit on the wall, does it help you to feel like that body of work is complete? Does it help you to move on when things come to the wall or come to the printed page?
I think we both say yes. Yes. I mean, it's yes.
There's a completion.
Actually, it's because you're sick to death.
Because you're sick to death of it, and it finally gets on the wall.
Well, I'm clearly older than Kate, but we both share. There, certainly, men and women of my generation always thought that a book was almost the Holy Grail. It's a wonderful thing, and one of the mantras is, you know, it's a miracle when a book comes out. It's God's own miracle when a good book comes out. There's a lot of pitfalls, just a whole lot of pitfalls. And I don't know that the pitfalls remain, but I don't know that it's the Holy Grail anymore, you know, with social media and et cetera, things have changed somewhat, or not somewhat, quite a bit. And world's gotten more interesting and a little bit different. But I don't know the answer to that question, but it was always a great thing.
I know that both of you have done some commercial work, and Keith, you showed us a slide tonight of that. I remember you sharing a story about Kathy Ryan from the New York Times calling one time that a photographer that she'd hired had given her a copy of, I think it was Uncertain to Blue, as a gift afterwards. She picked up the phone and called you, and you've done some great work in editorial and in music. I remember when I came to your house one time, you had a jacket on that Jimmy Dale Gilmore had given you. He'd been there the day before, and you guys were shooting. And Kate, you've had some experiences as well in editorial and also in music. You worked with Stacy at Harper's, and some music covers. Can you both talk about that other, the Sean Colvin cover? Remember when she came to Tucson and stayed at your house? And yeah.
She told me that Sean Colvin paraded around the house naked all the time.
She did. I was shocked. Yeah, I forgot, actually. I mean, I've not done any serious commercial work ever. It's usually, a friend of a friend says, hey, why don't you do that? Or Stacey here from Harper's says, let's put that picture in the magazine. And I say, great. So, and Stacey commissioned the big, the bald eagle photogram, which was a whole amazing story. And, but I've never considered myself a commercial photographer. I have no clue what I'm doing. I don't even have a light, I don't, lights. I don't have the equipment. I don't have anything. I don't have a clue. So I just sort of muddle my way through, as I said, more because friends have said, that's a good idea, you should do that. And I think I do. But it's very different. I think you've got a much better take on.
Well, my thinking is that that it's good occasionally, really good, for an artist to have to please somebody besides themselves. And the thing I've learned about my forays into the commercial world, I've been grateful for all of them, is that forces you to learn things or do things that you wouldn't do left to your own devices. Sometimes it's technical. Sometimes it just takes a different mindset. But anything you learn that broadens your thinking about your medium is a useful thing. So
I remember you saying, Keith, that it's interesting and an education and mindful in a way to put your pictures in a completely different context and open them to a different audience. And I'm forever grateful that you allowed me to use the sleeping swan on the cover of the Swanstock catalog, which was really wonderful. And all of you should know that the bald eagle picture that Stacey commissioned from Kate, I think you all went to Colorado to make that picture. That was, if I'm not mistaken, that was the opening image at the Grasslands show at the Tucson Museum of Art when you all walked into the exhibition hall. That was the solitary image. It was stunning. I think you did see it in that way, didn't you, Elsa? Which is great. So I have one more thing I want to ask you all about, and I'm not quite sure if we'll have time for other questions, but I know that the two of you step out of your door and step into the world of teaching, rather intensive workshops. And we all teach at the Santa Fe workshops, a place that we love, and both of you teach other places as well. Can you share with us what you take away from that? Why would one leave their studio to go and become immersed 18 hours a day or whatever it is with people that you don't know that leave your life in 5 days or not?
Oh, me first. Well, there's the money. No, it's. I mean, the Santa Fe thing is great because it's a great honor. You get to meet other photographers who are teaching that, are famous and you always wanted to meet and can't imagine that you'd ever encounter and get drunk with in the evenings and that sort of thing. And so it's wonderful to be in Santa Fe with just a whole group of very creative people all doing completely different things. And again, the students are usually, desperate to learn as much as they possibly can in that short period of time, so it becomes, intense. And I guess it's very gratifying to know that you really do inspire people, and you might change, their minds about something, or the way they think, or the way they see, or anything like that. So I don't know. I think we all feel inspired. Also, the students are very inspiring. I mean, sometimes you get students who just blow you away, and you come home changed because of them. And so it's a whole symbiotic relationship, the teaching thing. Not so much with undergraduates in universities who you usually want to kill by the end of a semester, and who are that's not very nice of me, but they're a bit lazier and less motivated than the adult sorts of workshop situations. But it's all good. I mean, Keith teaches all the time, full time, so it's different. He's a whole. You got more things to say.
I think essentially being a still photographer as opposed to doing videos or film or something like that, it's a relatively solitary profession. I mean, sometimes you work with one other person. If you make a film or a video, you generally have a small crew. And my theory is, or my thinking is, it's good every now and then to go surround yourself with other creative people and to eat, drink, and sleep photography, books, discussions about film, sometimes fueled by alcohol. I think it's a great thing on occasion. You come back exhausted and invigorated. And it goes back to what I said in the beginning. I think we all need the work of other people. That's a good thing. I don't like the vacuum business.
And I can say Keith and I've had, or I should say I've had the good fortune of teaching many weeks at Santa Fe and other places with you. And something I always admire, when you're amongst your peers like you were tonight, you so often show brand new work that hasn't been seen before, that you're not sure what will happen with it. Who knows, who cares if the dealers will be interested in it, like what you shared tonight with Pat's beautiful shoes. That was, we're so grateful for that.
Okay.
So I want to close this session with two quotes. One, I'm going to steal from you. It was what you closed our session in Austin in 2010. You said that one of your favorite quote at that time was by George Luis Borges, and it was, I always imagine that paradise will be kind of a library, which I just loved.
Great.
And then I want to tell you both, I reached out to Bill Witless, who's such a dear friend to the two of them, as you've heard throughout the evening, and an amazing person that touches so many of us. And I told him that Josh and his wife were having their baby, and I was going to possibly pinch hit, and called him yesterday and asked for a quote from him, because he's one of the pieces of glue, I think, that certainly holds you two in longtime friendships, and Texas and Mexico and many, many decades of history together. And this is what Bill said. He said, Kate and Keith are not only among the pioneers of fine art photography in our country, but more importantly, they are the beating heart and soul of it as well.
He did not write that. Michelle wrote that, man. I'm telling you, he did not write that.
He did. He did. I called him from the airport in Albuquerque, and he delivered that today, which is really so sweet. Yeah, yeah. So I'm not sure. Do we have time to take some questions? Okay, great. That would be great. Who's got a question they'd like to ask of Kate or Keith? Yes. Should we be running the mic up? Or repeat it? Yeah.
I will project. I'm a big fan, of course, Kate knows that, of yours. How do you get so many dead animals?
The perennial question, how do you get so many dead animals in your house?
I've never had that question before.
That work?
Actually, what happened was when I started
not work.
Making dead animal pictures a long time ago, you know, my neighbors would say, oh, by the way, I've got a dead animal for you. And then they would tell their friends, and then their friends would say, oh, by the way, I've got a dead animal for you, until I suddenly have an entire network of people throughout the country who actually, and FedEx doesn't know this, but they actually ship me dead animals. But again, it's just a network of people who, and complete strangers will say, you don't know me, but I know you're someone who knows you, and I've got this cardinal. And I guess they know that I'm going to do something good or beautiful, or memorialize it. So people kind of want to get them to me. So anyway. But
as a guest in her house, don't open the freezer in the back room. It's really scary. Other questions? Yes.
Hi, Kate. I'm going to follow up with the dead animals. And I think it's a kind of two-part question. So on the one hand, do you have a spiritual belief or some sort of understanding of the vessel of the bodies? And then do you feel that the photographs are sort of translations of that, or are the photographs really truly separate entities altogether?
Could you all hear that?
I guess the short answer is that I'm a third generation atheist, so I don't actually have real belief in the afterlife or a spirit. I guess I wouldn't say, I mean, being spiritual doesn't have to mean that you actually believe that something actually happens to a soul or so forth. I mean, I love the idea. I think that if there is a soul, all animals have as much of a soul as all human beings do, which is sort of the point, is that they all have to be taken notice of and memorialized and cared for and mourned and so forth, as much as our nearest and dearest do. So it's more to do with keeping a record and keeping a memory, and that's what their soul to me is, if you like. Is that kind of a pathetic answer to your question? I mean,
I don't think so. No, I guess I'm interested if one believed that there was an entity still there, then what does it mean to be subjecting it to, you know, being FedEx into the...
Right, yes. Well, I know. I mean, again, I was being flippant about that because obviously, I mean, a body is a body, and I still treat it reverently. It doesn't matter how incredibly smelly it is and awful, and you know, having to actually dig the hole, or sometimes I leave it out in the desert for other critters to eat or whatever. But I still feel very sad, you know, that when I'm handling, especially the big things, you know, the deer and the coyote, it's just so sad. But it's also this incredible honor to actually be sort of in the presence of a real wild animal and actually see it up that close and know it in that way. And so I don't have any problem with, you know, a body is a body. It's more to do with the fact that what I'm going to try and make honors it the best way I can. And it becomes a lasting thing. It becomes this, you know, record of the thing having existed in the real world at some time, forever, or as long as my photographic paper lasts, or you know what I'm saying? So I don't know, does that answer your question? So I was being flippant about but they have to get from place A to place B somehow, and mostly it's just people, you know, bringing them to me in their car, but occasionally Bill Witless has actually found families of raccoons dead on the road and decided he was going to ship them to me. And so it's just, you know, it's funny when you think about it, as I said, like, you know, the idea that you're shipping dead animals and paying top dollar to get them there overnight. Anyway.
For their portrait. Yes, other questions? Yes, Stacy.
Well, this is just to follow up on that too, just because I've known Keats and Kate's work for so long and love it so much. But what struck me so much about when I saw Kate's installation in San Marcos was it's really sad. And what she's talking about, at least what I got, was she was talking about our own responsibility to the natural world, in the natural world. And all these animals died on the road because of us. So I think that in your work, and also yours too, Keith, there's tremendous compassion. So is that something that you think about, or is that something that just comes from your own way of being in the world? Is that something you're trying to put into your work, or is it just coming because of who you are?
Most definitely, I have been an animal lover my whole life, and at least partly, as you saw, because I grew up in rural areas where there's lots of animals all around all the time. And as I said, my relatives were all unofficial animal rescuers. So you'd go to their house and there'd be all these animals, all coexisting, you know, birds and cats and you name it, with broken wings or one leg or whatever. And so I would witness as a small child this tenderness towards creatures. And I guess, you know, it got in there. And so I've always felt particularly concerned about the critters that you see dead on the road or injured or whatever. I mean, I I rescue animals whenever I can myself. I mean, out in the desert, of course, it's tough, but there are people here who still you can take them to, and they will try and resurrect them and make them live. And so I definitely just have that bent. I mean, I love animals, so in a way, memorializing them is a natural thing for me to do. But yes, I mean, I'm an advocate for all sorts of wildlife funds, and I'd like to start an animal rescue myself one of these days, maybe, besides being an old cat lady. An old cat rescue.
I think we've got time for one more question. Oh, there's one at the back. Do you mind standing and project?
So I noticed that during Kate's presentation, a lot of her work seemed to focus on desert animals, and I was wondering Kate, if there's like anything about the desert specifically that drew you to it, or if it was just like kind of like a coincidence.
What was the last thing?
I was wondering if there's anything about
yes, I guess I love deserts because I'm from Australia, and Australia's kind of one big desert. So everything about the sort of the starkness and the bleakness and the heat and the light, and of course there's some of the same kinds of animals in the Australian desert as there are in the Sonoran desert, just because they survive these extreme conditions. But yes, I love deserts. I'd much rather live in a desert than in all the beautiful, pretty places with pine trees and snow. And I hate snow. I hate snow. So, and ice, snow and ice. No, no, no. So, yeah, I just love deserts. But I think I naturally love deserts because I'm kind of from one.
I was wondering if Keith had anything to say about deserts as well.
Would you like to speak to that? What was the animals, the love of animals?
I'm not from the desert, but I can tell you, I learned a song a long time ago that I'm going to sing anyway. And it went something like, all God's creatures got a place in the choir. Some sing low, some sing higher, some call out loud on the telephone wire. And some just clap their hands or paws or anything they got now.
Well, I think on that wonderful note, I want to remind all of you that tomorrow night at 7 o'clock at Etherton, you'll have a chance to see the beautiful work of Keith and Kate on the wall, and they'll have their books there for book signing. And remind you that this week on Thursday night, there's an event here at the center. I believe the title of the panel is The Curator, the Collector, and the Artist. Is that, and so how's that sound? That sounds good? And Joanne Callis will be coming from Los Angeles, one of the artists that's included in the performance exhibition here. So that's Thursday at 5:30 with an opening reception here in the lobby area afterwards. So we hope you'll all come. We'll see you Thursday next week and tomorrow night at Etherton. And thank you, Terry, for the Etherton Distinguished Lecture Series.